So we started the business in June of 2020, and praise God, there were a lot of clients that came in and were doing one-on-one coaching with me. And I was the only employee of the business that I owned for a period of time. We quickly started hiring people, but for a period of time, I was the only employee. And as a lot of the people listening to this podcast will resonate with, like, in some ways at that very early stage, I didn't really own a business. I owned a job and I was doing the job, right? I was doing all of the coaching. I was flying all over the place doing these team training sessions. My days were booked end to end. And I was making all the decisions, having all the customer interactions, which I look back at that right now and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, thank God that was a season, because I think I can be a really organized, deliberate, like systematic person for like a stretch of about 4 weeks. And after that, everything explodes in my face. And honestly, I hired my first EA within the first 4 weeks. Thank God. So, but within that period of time where really, when I look back at it, I owned a job, I'm so grateful just because of some mentorship that I had and some other business owners that I had observed and some leaders that I've learned from. I was pretty intentional about, in my basement apartment that I was renting at the time, in the midst of all that craziness of my calendar and in the midst of being all over the place, I would have like these 2-hour blocks that I would put on my calendar ahead of time. And I would just kind of think about it as like whiteboard time. Like, this is my whiteboard thinking time. And what that time ended up becoming was not more doing work in the business. What that time ended up becoming was more of me working on the business and, quite frankly, on my life at that time. And it really was centered around the idea of like, unless I do different things, I'm going to be doing the same things 6 months from now that I'm doing today. And I just kind of already had this awareness of like, I can do this right now, but if I'm doing this 6 months from now, it's not going to be good. And if I'm doing it a year from now, it's going to kill me, right? And so I kind of had this awareness around that. And that whiteboard session, 2 hours with the whiteboard, was just the initial stages of what we now do way more thoughtfully and methodically with a whole team of people, just focused on strategy. Mm-hmm. It's saying, what do we need to do new and different, above and ahead, to get different results than what we're currently getting? And the business that we have today would not be what it is if it weren't for those early days whiteboarding sessions. I probably would still be doing one-on-one coaching, or we'd be saying my eulogy right now because I'd be totally burnt out. So that's why I believe in the topic that we're diving into today so much.
Yeah. Just curious, how often were you doing those? At that time? I
mean, if I'm being honest, it was probably sporadic. So it wasn't like, I don't want to present myself as like, I was nails. About every 2 weeks, I do a strategy session. I would say once a month-ish is what I would say. The thing that I think I did do well is if I put it on the calendar because I started to feel a need for it, I would stick to it. I would turn off my phone. I would pull out the whiteboard and I would say, I'm actually going to stick to this. If I were to go back and do it all over again, I would tell myself, you're doing this every week and there's no ifs, and, or buts. You're doing it every week because I believe so much now in the value of it. And oftentimes if you're waiting till you feel like you need it, you're already too late.
Mm. That feeling that you're describing is like running on the hamster wheel, I think, is like the image that a lot of people think of when it comes to working in their business, doing the tactical things and not taking the time to step back and actually think strategically. What was the point that you started to really realize the value of that? Was it in that first month, or did it take you time to look back and go, oh, those whiteboard sessions, like, this is why they were so valuable?
It took me a long time to recognize the value of it in our business. But I believed in the value of it for our business because I saw so many examples of other people doing it, and like in-depth examples. I have this very unique perspective that I just consider such a total blessing, in that I have probably had, over 1,000 90-minute phone calls with business owners at this point, right? Because I've been doing what we're doing now for, over 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I get this lens into like all of these different strategies for doing this thing called owning a business. And I get to see what works and what doesn't. And what I always saw was the people that did stuff like this, it seems to go really well for them. And so I had to borrow some belief. I didn't necessarily have the proof this is absolutely going to work for our business and it's going to pay off tenfold. I just kind of had to look and be like, well, 9 out of 10 times when other people do something like this, it pays off tenfold. So I'm going to trust those odds and say it's the right thing to do and apply myself to it.
So you have 5 like principles behind leading strategically.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those.
Yeah. And really, I would think of these as truths. And the reason why I wanted to frame this conversation as truths about strategy is because the word strategy is very, in my opinion, overused in the business and leadership and particularly coaching space. And the reason why I say overused is people use it to describe things that are not strategy. And like I see companies that are making a lot of money doing strategy sessions for people and their teams, and they're going in and they're doing maybe good work, but it's not strategy, right? And so I think there's a lot of mumbo jumbo and mess around this topic. And so this is kind of our effort to set the record straight so we all have a firm understanding around what strategy is. And the first truth that I wanted people to remember is there's a difference between strategy and tactics. And we conceptually get this, right? Like, I don't think I just said that and people were like, what? This is shocking, right? But what I often see is, I've seen a $20 million company go to their strategic planning meeting and spend all of their time talking about tactics. And they think that it was the right thing to do. And what I often see happens is we just think that strategic planning is just having dedicated time to do the day-to-day X's and O's with a certain group of people, right? That it's like, we're going to have all of the conversations that we would have in our other meetings. We're just have more time and space now, and we happen to be in this beautiful location and we're going to do it there, right? That's not strategy, right? And it's not putting out fires, and it's really tempting to put out fires. So if you have any misconception on your team that that's what strategy is, you're going to deviate to putting out fires. Strategy is working on the business, not in the business. And we did our strategic planning meeting as a team over the course of 2 days just recently. There were so many times, I don't know if you feel this way, there were so many times in that meeting where I almost said something and then I had to bite my tongue because I said, that's a tactical issue. Like, I am about to ask Ben a tactical question, or I'm about to make a tactical comment to Olivia or Michelle. And this is not for tactics. It's the stuff that I was going to say was necessary and good to say. It just wasn't for strategy. And so we got to be really disciplined about understanding the difference.
Can you break those two down a little more, like, I guess clearly, like what is the difference between strategy and tactics?
Yeah. And I think actually you're alluding to the second truth too. So let's get into that as well. So strategy, what is strategy? Here's the functional definition I like to use is strategy is getting above, ahead, and upstream to do things that are new and different. I'm going to say it again. Strategy is getting above, ahead, and upstream to do things that are new and different. And then tactics is being embroiled and embattled by the day-to-day activities that are getting you your current results. So when you make the sale, when you send the email, when you solve the customer problem, when you talk to the team member, when you create the marketing ad, you are working in the business. Those are tactical things. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of business and leadership coaching that they talk so much against working in the business that they demean working in the business. If you and others don't work in the business, the lights don't stay on, right? And so you do have to work in the business. I'm not trying to demean tactics at all, but then what is strategy and how is strategy different than that? Well, it's above, ahead, and upstream. So above is saying we're not going to be embroiled and embattled by today's issues, today's problems, or even what we are currently doing right now. Like, we are not going to talk about that. We are going to get above, and instead of saying we're going to run through the brick wall, we're going to get over the entire maze and say, is there a way around this brick wall, right? So that's above. Ahead, it's kind of, I think of it as preflection, right? Saying, what would we focus on right now that if we were to focus on it, we'd be really grateful in 6 months, right? That's a preflection question, ahead. And then upstream. There's a great parable on this that if we want to dive into it, we can. But really it's saying, what are the underlying source causes of the challenges or problems that we're currently experiencing? And instead of just playing the daily version of whack-a-mole. How do we get upstream of those so that we actually solve for the source and we're never having these conversations again?
One of the things that comes to mind when you mention new and different, and I think Olivia actually posed this in one of our meetings somewhat recently. Like in our vision right now, we're talking about creative adventure, and that's a part of our vision. And I think at one point she basically posed the idea of like, what constitutes creative adventure and what is like us just throwing the label creative adventure on it because it feels new and different. Like I guess from that, how does a team stay aligned in their strategy in a way where they're not going just because it's new and different and we're taking this time, to have some strategy, we're just creating all these new ideas and work within the organization. Like how does a team and leadership, how do they stay aligned in like where their real mission is going and maybe not getting distracted or when you put a group of threes in a room together, they're just coming up with a bunch of different ideas of things to do.
Yeah, it's so well said because we have an incredible proclivity to do that. Our full vision statement is we are on the path to maximize core competencies, which is coaching, community experiences, and team through or on the way to 1,000 leaders impacted and creative adventure by January 2028. And then we have a whole document that illustrates what that is and what that means as we know it right now, right, is kind of what that document exists as. And you use this, right, in your day-to-day work. You're building strategy off of that document. Here's what I often find is the closer you move to something, the more clear you need to get. So whenever we launched that vision charter, me saying creative adventure, we're going to do things that are new and different in a spirit of play and for the service of others that we can make a business case for. That was enough clarity at that time. And people were like, yes, we spent all this time operationalizing our business. Now we're going to engage in some risk taking, some creativity, some launching of new products. That was enough clarity at that time. Now we're a year into this, and it's why there are a multitude of reasons why I so value Olivia's perspective. But she is a strategist through and through, I think, especially in conversations like the one we had. And she's so good at pumping the brakes and being like, hey, the sheer energy and fist pumping that was satisfactory and sufficient a year ago is no longer satisfactory and sufficient. And also, that's getting above, this is getting ahead. If we continue to do what we're doing, these are the problems that I anticipate arising within our team, within our structure, even within our customer base. So helpful, right? And so to your actual question, how do you actually stay aligned? The way we do it is quarterly strategic planning meetings with a very particular method to say, where are we going? What's most important right now? And then what discussions do we need to have around how we're thinking about where we're going and what's important right now? And that's 2 half days is how our leadership team does it. And then a bi-weekly is how we're currently doing it, 60 to 75 minute strategic accountability meeting where we track and discuss progress with how we're doing. The reason why a lot of people struggle with alignment is because they lack original clarity on their vision, or they don't have a rhythm for alignment. And we just assume that alignment just happens. Alignment never just happens. It's always intentionality that causes it.
Is there anything else you wanted to say on that note?
No, I think we should move to the third truth.
Cool.
And we've already kind of alluded to it too. The difference between a good strategy and a great strategy is often perspective. And you could really take this from a good idea to a great idea is other people, right? There have been so many times where I think I've got a good idea. And in the past, I would often say, that's a good idea. I'm going to go act on that. Now I'm a little bit more disciplined about saying, it's a good idea. How do I take a good idea to being a great idea? I get some other perspectives in the room and we talk about it. We chop it up. We ask questions about it. And I often see that that's the same with strategy. Is like you have one individual seat on the bus that your company is. And what you really need to have an informed, comprehensive, really effective strategy that considers all of the variables at play is multiple perspectives. That can be other owners of the business. That can be a leadership team. That can also be a board of advisors. It can also be a lot of people in our community use office hours, which is a community call we have 3 times a week for this exact purpose, to say, this is what I'm thinking what perspectives do I need to hear on this? And that can just be so valuable. So it's just important to involve other voices and get other thoughts.
How do you choose what voices you actually let in? And I guess the number of voices you ask in a decision.
We just re-recorded a whole teaching on this for base camp on Fundamental 3, which is leadership team meeting. And part of Fundamental 3, the content that we teach is this: the criteria for who you want on your leadership team. We won't do the bullet point by bullet point list right now, but here's the things that stand out to me, and here's who I want to speak into our strategy. Number one is like a degree of perceived longevity and loyalty. Now, I have known organizations that say like, hey, if you're going to be a part of the leadership team, I need a commitment from you that you're going to be here for the next 10 years. And I would advise against that, just because the last thing that you want is someone that doesn't actually want to be there, but is just there because they made some arbitrary commitment that they didn't know what they were walking into, that they'd be there for 10 years, right? You are always relying on trust. And what we're saying here is like, man, when I want people speaking into the leadership decisions we're making, I'm hoping, it's certainly not guaranteed and it will not always happen, but I'm hoping that the people that I'm working with to make these plans are also going to be the people that I work with to execute and then experience the fruit of these plans. And so perceive loyalty and longevity, trust. You can't have a good leadership or a good strategy session if you feel the need to withhold information because you don't feel they can handle it. And you can take that through a confidentiality lens. Like, I think you are shooting yourself in the foot as a business owner if you have a leadership team and your leadership team has financial questions, and the reason why they're not getting answers is because you're too afraid to share financial information with them. You are only hurting yourself in that regard, right? And so willingness to share and educate around the finances is really, really helpful and good. So trust is number 2. And then number 3 would be values and mission alignment. If you don't have the same driving why, you could look at the same problem and think that the right way to approach it is 2 different ways. The same is true for values, right? If you and I are looking at the same problem with a customer or something like that, but you and I have radically different values, we could both make the problem go away, but the way we do it would be radically different because we don't have values alignment. And we've got to remember that we're not just prioritizing the outcome, we're prioritizing the way we accomplish the outcomes we accomplish. So values alignment is critically important. And then finally, I would say, do you value their perspective? It can be really tempting to be like, I really like this person and they've been here for a while, so I want them in the room. If you don't respect their competency, and I don't say, of course you respect them as a person, but if you are not willing to be argued down from your firmly held position because of what this person is saying, then they're probably not a good fit, is what I would say.
Do you have any examples, whether it's from yourself or from other leaders, of like when this was really valuable?
Perspectives in particular?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say we have 12 fundamentals for healthy growth. One of them is constructing a leadership team and creating a really robust leadership team meeting agenda and rhythm. And I would say out of all the fundamentals, this is one of the ones that we get the most raving feedback in terms of the actual transformation that it made for their business. The most common piece of feedback that I've seen comes when people just say like, I don't feel like I'm carrying all of this anymore. I just, this is a little bit of a different context, but it's directly related. I had a conversation with one of our customers recently that he said, hey, because of conversations that I've been having with my coach, Kyle was his coach, he said, we made this leadership hire that I actually had never thought of making, but we hired this guy. He's a cultural fit and he's just absolutely awesome. And he said, Alex, like, I'm coming back from Europe after 3 days right now. Like I did a 3-day trip to Europe, and he's like, and we were there and some conversations came up and they were like, we need someone from your team to come here again. And like in just a couple weeks. And he was like, that's actually really good for our business. He was like, it was actually a really positive thing. But he was like, I have a family. Like I have other responsibilities as the CEO of this business. Like I have all these other things that I need to be doing. And he was like, it was such a blessing to be like, we can send that guy that we hired. And he's like, and I trust him and he's excellent. And I'm going to be able to hear his perspective whenever he gets back. And he was like, just having that other leader to help carry the weight, you could just hear the relief in his voice as he was realizing, I don't have to travel to Europe again for a 3-day trip in a couple weeks. Really, really cool.
Say someone is in a position or they own a business and they don't really have the like staffing to have a true leadership team. What would you tell them when it comes to perspective?
I would say you're wrong.
Okay, there you go.
And what I mean by that is you have you.
Yeah.
And what I'm really describing at the beginning of this podcast is I was my leadership team. And that's when I started to really take those whiteboarding sessions we talked about at the beginning, where I was thinking strategically about the future of my and our business really seriously, is whenever I started to treat myself as the leadership team. And how would you expect the leadership team to act? Would you expect them to have a whiteboard out while simultaneously having social media open and have their phone out and be distracted? And I said, no, I would expect the leadership team to have an agenda. And so I wrote an agenda for myself. And I would expect the leadership team to start on time and end on time. So I started and ended on time. I would expect the leadership team to document action items and actually make decisions in this meeting. And so I just said, right now, I'm what we've got. And praise God, we're not there anymore. But I would just say, do not wait. You cannot wait to start thinking and leading strategically. And if you've only got you, you've only got you. Use what you've got.
Cool. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay, very good. The fourth truth that we want people to remember and think about is the specificity of your strategy can never exceed the specificity of your vision. And so this has been so helpful for me. A lot of times people think they have a strategy problem. And the way that shows up is indecision. I don't know what we should do next. I don't know where we should spend capital. I don't know what hire we should make next. I don't know how we should solve this problem. I don't know how we should overcome this obstacle. We think we have a strategy problem. In reality, we have a vision problem. Let me give you an example. If I woke up tomorrow morning, gave you a call and said, Ben, we're going to get in my car at 10 a.m. today, and we're going to drive to the Northeast, right? Well, what's our route to the Northeast? Well, the Northeast is a very broad destination. So that could be Northeast Phoenix. That could be Northeast Arizona. That could be the Northeast.
My thought was Colorado. I'm trying to go skiing.
There you go. I like it. And so you can already see how misalignment could come up, right? How it could arise. Well, because my vision was so broad, the number of possible ways we could get to where we're going is infinite, right? Like, are we going to walk? Are we going to drive? Are we going to fly? Are we going to take a boat to the Northeast, right? Where are we going? Because that's going to inform what we're doing. If I woke up tomorrow and I called you at 10 a.m. and I said, Ben, we're going to get on a bus and travel to 10th Street in Manchester in New York City. Sorry, we're not going to Colorado. We're going to New York City, right? Well, now we got a very specific destination, and there's one or two best possible routes to get there. The more specific your destination is, the more specific your route and therefore strategy will be. And so what I see is people feel so fuzzy on what they need to do next, the way that they should go. And the reason why is because they don't actually know where they want to go. And so often when people come to us, they actually come to our coaches saying, I need strategy work. I want you to come to a strategic planning session. I want you to do a planning day with our team. The first question we ask is, talk to me about your vision. And what we find is there's no vision documented. There's no clear goals, all of that. And as a result, their strategy is incredibly muddy. So what we often end up doing is a vision session followed by a strategy session. The specificity of your strategy can never exceed the specificity of your vision.
Talk about whiteboarding sessions. I mean, we had one pretty early on last year when I joined the team around marketing. And at the time, I don't think we had really defined exactly where we were going in that department. You know, even some of the products and things that we're going to be rolling out, like, weren't even in our minds during that meeting. One of the terms that we applied as like a goal attached to our vision was just, we have amassed a huge audience, like, and that was pretty much it, like, through our marketing channels. And we kept it pretty vague for several months. I feel like the moment, you know, around the new year that I was able to sit down and step back and go, what are our actual goals? What does a huge audience even mean? And maybe what are the steps that we need to take to get there? And started creating clearer goals was when I was like, oh, this is what we need to do. And these are the next steps. And it just made the whole process so much easier.
Yeah. There's a version of me that would have looked at our whiteboard that we created that day, which I'm so grateful for that day, especially now.
Yeah.
But would have looked at that whiteboard we created and would have maybe degraded a little bit, because I've been like, that lacks sophistication. It lacks specificity, right? Literally one of our goals was we have amassed a huge audience. And like you and I both joked about what, like we were saying it jokingly at that time. But what I often have found is that oftentimes our desire for specificity and sophistication ends up putting us in a box that dramatically limits creativity and also is unnecessary for the time that we're in. 6 months ago, we did not need specific metrics yet. We did not need, because we didn't even have a baseline of what we were doing yet. Like we didn't need specific hows figured out yet, right? There were so many points on that were vague. The specificity that we had then, or lack thereof, would be insufficient for where we are today.
Yeah.
But that's why it's such a blessing to do the session with a leader on your team that you trust, which is you in this case. Because, I mean, you showed up post-Christmas, and I was like, I love post-Christmas Ben, because post-Christmas Ben showed up with all of these metrics and detail. And like, I took the whiteboard session that we had a handful of months ago, and I feel like we've got more information now that this is what we're actually looking for. This is where we're actually going. I was like, this is great, right? But unless you have conversation A, you can't have conversation B, is what I would say. And so start somewhere and then expect that the specificity will come over time.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways that acted as a placeholder for what we then developed into more specific goals and visions.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Should we move on to number 5?
Yep.
And we actually just alluded to it there too. Number 5 is serious strategy without serious commitment is superficial. So David Brooks defines commitment as when you fall in love with something to such a degree that you put structure around it for the times when you no longer feel in love with it. That's good. And we need that. Whenever we end our 2 half-day strategic planning sessions, I feel like this is a lot of work, but I also feel like this is really exciting. And it used to be that the final point of our agenda would be define our strategic priorities, pray, and then we're done with the strategic planning meeting. And I have learned that that's not a good idea. We should always end in prayer. We're not moving that, but there's a missing point in that I think is really critical, because oftentimes the most emotionally excited I feel about the strategic priorities is right before I've started actually working on them. Right? And the minute you start working on them, you're like, wow, this is a lot of work. And it opens up more work and more work. That's part of the gig, right? It's part of the job. And ultimately it's a love over time is what I would say is what you experience at. But there's often times where you don't feel like it. And so now what we do is we define our strategic priorities, get our success statements or our plan for success statements in order. And then there's just a small point on the agenda that says, define or revisit our accountability rhythm, which is how often are we meeting up to check in on how we are doing with these strategic priorities. That is critical, because there will be days where you or the leaders on your team do not feel like it. And the way that you respond to those days will tell me everything I need to know about the progress your business is going to make. And we should not expect that willpower alone will get us to where we need to go. We need to anticipate that we will have to exert extreme commitment, and commitment looks like rhythm and structure that is immovable, that we say, dadgummit, we're doing this. And so serious strategy without serious commitment is really useless.
Yeah. That just sounds like a principle for life.
I honestly, all of these, a lot of people struggle because they don't think strategically about their life. I actually think all of these truths could be applied to a personal context, and maybe we could have that conversation someday.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to share on the topic of leading strategically?
I think I would just give everyone challenge that when you're in the firestorm, the content that I'm talking about right now sounds ridiculous. Like, I promise you that, because your calendar's full. There's problems in your inbox every single day. You've got to generate revenue for the company to make payroll, all of that. And so all of this stuff, it's like sit in a whiteboard or sit in a room with a whiteboard for 2 hours. I mean, I sound like a fool saying that. I would tell you, don't listen to that voice, because if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep getting what you always got. That's common sense. And so we can't expect to just keep running on the hamster wheel that is the craziness of our business leadership and life, and then say 6 months, this will be better. We also can't say, I'm going to keep running on this hamster wheel, and one day it will become convenient to do strategy. That has never been my experience or my observation. It is always because a leader literally put their foot in the ground and said, dadgummit, no more. I am going to do this. Not because I feel like it, not because I always want to do it, not because I can even see the results of it right now, just because I actually believe it's the right thing to do in service of others. So just do it, is what I would say. And my promise to you is if you do it with your whole heart for the glory of God, for service of others, and you apply yourself to it consistently, you will see the results compound over time.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Ben.
Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.